The SMG, Striker, and Sentry nerfs are good changes that are coming at the worst possible time. In this video, I'm going to give you a breakdown of why these changes are good for game health in the long term, but address the very, very valid concern that they currently serve to make the tactician meta problem even worse. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to what I'm sure will be my most unpopular video ever. A video where I explain why I think the nerfs that Massive have announced for patch 1.3 are actually good changes, but absolutely agree that they are implemented at a very, very poor time indeed. I know this video is going to upset and frustrate a number of people who have worked very hard to grind their god roll AUG and their perfect Striker Sentry combo. But I promise that in my discussion of these changes, I'm going to show every perspective on this matter, the utmost respect, because I know how frustrating it is to see your favorite shit get nerfed. Still, I think that there are some things that I need to say that no one else is really saying right now, and I think that dialogue that we have as a community is really important, and it needs to have a variety of perspectives in order to ensure that we sort of arrive at the best possible place through the best possible discussion. So absolutely dislike this video if you like, but at least hear me out, because the number one priority that I have as a member of this community is to see the game grow and succeed so that more and more people can enjoy it, because yeah, I really love this game. So let's start by overall firstly discussing the nerfs. Anyone that hasn't heard about it is sort of you probably have. There's a lot of outcry about these changes, but essentially Massive have said that they are going to be nerfing the Vector and the AUG by about 10%. They are going to be mildly addressing the M1A accuracy, as in sort of increasing its reticle spread. No big deal, we can probably not talk about that one here. And they're also going to be nerfing Striker and Sentry, taking the sort of 2 and 3 piece bonuses that give that set a lot of power and moving that instead to a 5-piece bonus, so that you basically need to go much deeper into those sets to get the huge amount of power out of it that you're currently getting. And the challenge of that, and the sort of the biggest byproduct of that, is that you really can't, well, there's two things really. The first is that it overall reduces our net total DPS output, making it much harder to kill tacticians, which are a big problem right now. And it also removes our ability to wear Final Measure, which is a really strong mitigant against tacticians with their huge sticky bombs, and also the Dark Zone in general, where you have these flamethrowers that are just completely melting you unless you're wearing 2-piece Final Measure. So let's break all these changes down so you really know what we're talking about. So first of all, on the SMG buffs, the AUG and the Vector. Now, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but these changes are actually 100% justified. The AUG and the Vector are statistical outliers in the SMG subclass in a very big way. They had the highest per bullet damage and scaling of any automatic weapon in the game, bar 1 or 2, and they were just absolute monsters, and unquestionably the best and only choice if you were looking to deal damage, given their sort of reload speeds, their stability, their rates of fire, their per bullet damage, their scaling, their everything. They're just huge, right? So, this nerf actually puts them on par with a number of other SMGs, and depending on how you like to deal your damage, they are still actually the very best automatic weapon in the game. The only thing that edges them out slightly is the MP7, which is sort of I believe a better DPS weapon now, but it has a faster rate of fire, which makes it a lot more risky to use. You essentially need to be able to land your shots in a way that you don't really need to worry about with your AUG, because it fires slower and has a larger magazine. So I know what a lot of people right now are thinking. They're thinking, oh my god, don't nerf weapons, just make every other gun in the game as powerful as the AUG and the Vector. That is clearly the solution. And it's a really fair point, to be honest with you, given that the tactician build right now is so dominant, and the huge amounts of health that NPC targets have in their Dark Zone, and they're soon to have in heroic mode when we start going up against level 35 enemies. The idea of buffing all weapon types is actually a really legitimate solution, right? But just purely think for a moment about what doing that would mean from a pure coding perspective. There are nearly 100 types of weapons in the division, and there's only really 8 to 10 hours in a day where the developers can actually do their jobs. Is the solution to the AUG and Vector balance problem to buff every single weapon in the game and rebalance them so that they are all as strong as the Vector, spending literally like hundreds or thousands of hours tuning tuning these weapons appropriately, coding them so that there's all these, implementing these changes. Is that the solution? Or do you actually just nerf these 2 weapons to bring them in line with the other 98 weapons, and then look to increase player power by other means, such as through, stats or higher level gears, or different gear sets, or through higher base damage across the board from 229 weapons, or being able to recalibrate your weapons, or all of these sorts of things, right? Do you do that instead, or do you just basically bring every other weapon up, right? So in my personal view, I think if we look at this challenge practically, we'd say that, I would much rather the developers spend their time solving the other problems in the game, right, around the tactician meta, and building new content for me, and finding more and different interesting ways to make me powerful, rather than just buffing the stats on all my weapons so that they all just do more damage, right? Now, I know that a lot of people don't agree with that, and they'd love to see all of their weapons become immediately more powerful. To be honest with you, that's not how I see the solution to this. The limited amount of time that developers have to work on this game, I would rather see them balance it by, as I said, investing in other new ideas rather than just bringing the numbers up across the board, because I don't think that that is a sustainable solution to the issue of 2 weapons being completely out of balance versus the rest of the game. So I think that them actually just tuning these weapons down so they're in line with all of the other weapon types is actually a perfectly reasonable solution, and I kind of think everyone needs to sort of relax a little bit, and I'll tell you why, right? I'm genuinely concerned about the way that video game communities these days are responding to nerfs in video games. So Destiny has conditioned us to hate nerfs, right? We had this experience where things like the Vex Mythoclast were nerfed into the ground, fusion rifles, shotguns, etc. And I know a lot of you that are playing the Division now are now playing, came from Destiny, right? That was a really scarring experience because I think Bungie got those nerfs wrong. They didn't really write them, right? As in the Vex Mythoclast never became useful. Fusion rifles never became good, or only recently have seen some resurgence. Shotguns got a huge nerf a few months back as well, which really reduced their power and overall efficacy, right? And it sort of trained us to hate nerfs. But the fact is that good game design and the very best competitive multiplayer games that you play are based on nerfs. That's how you achieve perfect game balance. You nerf things, you tweak things, you buff things, whatever, but invariably you will also nerf things. So when we as a community respond to nerfs in a way that completely goes off the handle, what we're actually saying to developers is this. We're saying, don't put any cool shit in our game that might be overpowered, for fear that when you nerf it, we will then go mental and we will just go crazy, and then it's just huge amounts of fallout, right? So if I was a developer looking at the way that communities respond to nerfs, I'm naturally going to be more cautious, and I'm going to put in less ambitious, less bold things for fear that the community will respond to them really hard, will respond to nerfs really harshly, right? And that's not what I want developers to be doing. I want developers to be putting in all sorts of crazy crap, totally imbalanced, over the top stuff that's just pushing the envelope and really enlarging our understanding of the game, and then to balance it, and then to tweak it, then to nerf it so that it becomes good. You know what I mean? That's where I think we need to push things. So every time we fly off the handle when a nerf goes live, and and we sort of think, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever, blah, 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 I think that's sort of what we're doing. And I really think that needs to stop, because I think, as I said, there is a risk that publishers and developers will be less ambitious with their design for fear of community backlash. And that's only going to hurt us in the long term. So, I get where you're coming from. I get it. I've grinded my ass off. I've got a 3-2-1 gear set. I have an org and a vector that I love. I'm going to get hit by these nerfs too, but I'm far more interested in a balanced game that has lots of diversity in weapon choice rather than just relying on 2 weapons that rule them all. And I'm interested in engaging in these new gear sets rather than just ignoring them because they have less power than the other gear sets. And I guess that's a really good segue for us to talk about the next point, which is the Striker and Sentry bit, right? So for now, we actually don't know what this change will look like at the end state, as we don't know what the sort of 2 and 3 piece bonuses will be, but we have to assume that they are less powerful than the current options, because otherwise there'd be no point in nerfing these sets in the first place. So first of all, I think that these changes again are good for the long-term health of the game. Simply put, there was way too much power in these 2 and 3 piece bonuses, right? These bonuses alone would up your damage by like 50 or 60k DPS, which is just crazy amounts of damage relative to every other set in this game. It's for this reason that so many people ran these sets. From a raw damage perspective, they were simply the best. But to be honest, they were really badly designed, right? Putting just like that much power into these bonuses just pushed so many other options off the table. And given that Massive is now clearly pushing us towards gear sets that change the way that we play, rather than just adding more stats, these sets are really sort of at odds with the newly emerged sort of design philosophy that Massive are pursuing. And I think it's a really good philosophy as well that I need to call out, right? It's boring when I'm using a gear set and all it does is give me more stats, right? That's just boring. Like, getting more gear score increases my stats, okay? And if I'm using a gear set that's just doing the same thing, it's like, what's the point in that? Why am I doing that, right? I would much rather a gear set that augments me in some unique and interesting way, that changes the way that I play the game in an interesting way, rather than just having these like stat stick weapons or stat stick gear sets that just buff my numbers, because that doesn't really keep things interesting for me. I can't change things up and play the game a different way if that's the overall model for where gear sets are and where they need to go. So in my view, this is actually a really good change because it is going to force us to consider other set options. But I absolutely agree that this change and the SMG nerf come at the worst possible time, given the prominence of the tank-tician meta. The crit cap nerf, SMG nerfs, and striker sentry nerfs have resulted in a situation where our total damage output capacity, or capability I should say, has been notably diminished, while this build runs completely rampant through the Dark Zone, making it practically impossible to kill these guys, and it has seen no nerfs whatsoever. So yes, it sucks that these changes went through before a solution to the tank-tician build was found, because now we're basically fighting an even more uphill battle than we were before. Still, in my mind, these are actually two very separate design challenges, right? And they're sort of similar to the SMG challenge, right? I mentioned before. So, you know, is the answer to this challenge to buff, you know, all of the other gear sets to the point where we can really easily kill a tank-tician, right? No, I think that would break the game in too many parts. The answer is instead to nerf tank-tician appropriately so that we can fight against it within our existing constraints. So in my view, yes, this is the solution. So I'm totally, but obviously the thing with me is that I'm willing to wait and be patient for this change to come through, but I fully agree that the nerfs we're seeing now can and should have come later, as, you know, the way they're being implemented at the moment does make a bad problem worse. But let's be clear about this as well. You are going to be significantly more powerful than you have ever been before as a result of a number of other buffs coming in 1.3, including 25% sort of damage to LMGs when you're shooting a target that's out of cover, 30% damage to shotguns, including stagger, even though that only applies to PvE. You know, this is a huge increase in power for these weapons and can essentially be normalized out by saying something like, if you've got a really well-rolled assault rifle in the game, then you can add about 10% damage to that, right? That's how good like a new LMG or a shotgun is going to be in patch 1.3. So they're going to be really competitive weapons that are going to work up close or at range. So that's a nice little bit. But finally, and the very big one, is weapon recalibration, which will see your overall power level increase in a big way. The vast majority of us are not running god roll weapons. Sure, maybe like 10 or 15% of us have the perfect god roll weapon, but most of us are not. Most of us have like 2 out of 3 good rolls, or maybe even 1 good roll, right? The ability to re-roll one of your talents could immediately transform your very strong weapon into a god roll weapon, and could sort of immediately skyrocket your DPS by 20, 40, 50k, depending on the kind of talent that you get and how it synergizes with your build. So this is a really big deal that people aren't really discussing in the context of these nerfs, and I really think it's worth repeating at this point. So that's my perspective. As I said, I know a lot of you are going to sort of hate me for that. I appreciate that, I really do. But I think like this is how I feel about the game, right? And that is, I like this game. I want it to be more diverse and more interesting. And I think that if there are 2 weapons that are too powerful, the answer is not to buff every other weapon in the game, because I just think from a pure logistics perspective, I would much rather see the developers investing their time in new content rather than just trying to retune and recode every other weapon in the game, right? And similarly with gear sets, I'm far more interested in gear sets that change the way that I play and make me more powerful in different ways, rather than just by buffing my stats, because that's what gear score is for. And if gear score and new gear sets are doing exactly the same thing, then I think that, you know, that's just lazy design at that point. That's pointless, and I'm not really interested in that. So as I said, I completely respect the other opinion though, and the other opinion is I've worked really hard for my gear, and now you're nerfing it. You know, there's a tactician meta, and now it's harder to kill tacticians. That these changes come at the wrong time, that they are poorly thought out and poorly implemented, and those points are absolutely valid as well. And as I said, I fully respect those views. But I do think that we need to be willing to have this conversation in a better way than we are currently having it now, because the way that we react as a community to nerfs is going to have a very detrimental impact, not only on this game that we're playing now, but on all games more broadly, because it's going to make developers far more gun-shy, far less willing to be ambitious and bold in the things that they implement, for fear that when they do have to tune them, that the community will just, you know, explode with anger. You know, I want developers to be bold. I want them to try crazy, imbalanced shit, right? So that we can then find out what's new and what's interesting and what's possible, and then work backwards from there, rather than by, you know, incremental piecemeal change, for fear that, you know, one wrong foot will see us return to these nerf debates that I don't think are helpful for us at all. Anyway, guys, that's it from me. If you've made it to the end of this video and you've decided that, like, yep, Skill Up is a jerk and he's totally wrong, then please hit the dislike button now. But if you feel like I've made 1 or 2 valid points, then please hit that like button so that more people can see this video and be part of this conversation. Game development is a really nuanced art form, and I think that we need a variety of perspectives in the conversation around that if we're going to achieve the best possible outcome for our game. And I truly hope that you found my perspective both interesting and useful. Until next time, guys, take good care, and I will see you in the dark zone or the underground, or both. Take good care now. Bye-bye.